Okay. Medusa, Catherine Marsh, Chapter 6. Everyone began talking at once. Everyone except Ava. She still perched on the edge of her chair as if she'd been frozen there. Definitely liked your theory better, Fia said. Ava didn't answer. She was too busy imagining herself transforming from a mini Athena into a multi-headed fanged monster. Talk about unfair. This wasn't the way the story was supposed to go. She also couldn't believe that her mom had hidden this secret from her for her entire life. All she'd done was teach her some breathing exercises, as if counting breaths had ever stopped Scylla from snacking on Odysseus's men, or if all the Minotaur needed wasn't yearly. Let me try again. As if all the Minotaur needed wasn't yearly human sacrifice, but a little yoga. No wonder Isabel and Evelyn found her too intense. No wonder she was angry all the time. Her mom could have given her a warning, or at least a hint. Did her dad know? Did Jax? Ava scanned the room till she found him, but his shocked expression suggested that he was just as surprised as she was. Thea studied her arms as if they were about to transform into tentacles. I don't feel like a monster. A rogue's gallery of Greek mythical monsters flashed through Ava's mind. The nine-headed Hydra, the fire-breathing Chimera, the child-eating Lamia, the snake-haired Medusa, the bloody bird-winged harpies. She imagined them all at her family reunion, pinching her cheeks and crowing over how ugly she was. I want you to think, if you had to guess right now, what monster do you think she is? And by the way, look what my books look like. Now, if you have a library book or borrowed a book, of course you can't do that. But I own this book. I wonder what Miss Kim highlighted and why. I wonder. Mr. Orion clapped his hands. I don't want anyone to panic, so please listen. The great hall fell silent, but Ava noticed that the kids at her table were sneaking peeks at one another, probably looking for hidden claws or fangs. Just as there have always been gods, there have always been monsters. Heroes like Hercules, Perseus, and Bellerophon killed some of the worst with the help of the gods. The Olympians locked up others in the underworld. But many still managed to have mortal children who continued their lines and passed on some of their dangerous and destructive powers. In mortals, these powers usually develop around adolescence. That's teen years. Without intervention, these children can quickly spiral out of control and use their powers to wreak havoc and harm others. Owen. An image of his unresponsive face flashed in front of Ava. You okay? Via asked. Ava nodded, even though she wasn't. No wonder her mom had immediately arranged for her to go to the academia. Changes like this can be scary, Mr. Orion continued, which is why the Olympians founded the academia here in Venice. It's a safe distance away from Olympus in Greece, but close enough to keep an eye on you, especially for Poseidon, whose realm surrounds us. The purpose of our school is to teach you to control your powers and emotions. We want you to be forces of good rather than evil. So I'm going to read that again. Hint, that's the part I highlighted. The purpose of our school is to teach you to control your powers and emotions. We want you to be forces of good rather than evil. I don't have any powers, Fia whispered. Do you? No, Ava said. She didn't want to admit that she had already acted like a monster. Besides, she told herself it had only happened once. Does anyone remember the Latin phrase embossed on your plates? Mr. Orion asked. Latin was clearly not one of the languages Hermes had primed their ears for, but Ava still remembered the slogan. Genus non est fatum, Ava said. Mr. Orion smiled. Very good, Ava. Genus non est fatum is our school's motto. It means ancestry is not destiny. In other words, just because you are descended from a monster doesn't mean you will become one. The choice is yours. That deserves a highlight. So pardon me for just one moment while I go right in here. I'm sure Miss Marsh won't mind me marking up her book. Ancestry is not destiny. Just because you descended from a monster doesn't mean you will become one. The choice is yours. I think that's a great quote for everybody to remember. I don't think any of us are monsters or gods and goddesses, but your birth doesn't make you, or your family doesn't make you, right? The choice is yours. Choice. Ava clung to the word. She didn't want to be a monster, lashing out angrily, causing harm and destruction. Plus, monsters were always by themselves. They lived alone, usually in dark caves or on lonely islands. They didn't have friends. Her mom didn't have close friends, but she didn't scare people away either. She had a husband, not finally, husband, a family, a house in the suburbs. If her mom could learn to control the monstrous part of herself, so could she. That's a good point, right? I totally want a power, Thea whispered. That would be so cool. Eva blinked. Ava blinked. Cool? Come on, don't tell me you've never wanted a superpower. Thea whispered back. Did you miss the monster part? But Thea just shrugged as if the monster part wasn't such a big deal. Ava remembered Mr. Morrow sprawled out on the porch. Maybe Thea just hadn't realized yet that she had a power and had struck down the teacher. She certainly hadn't liked the way he'd treated Mr. Heff. It's late, and I know this is a lot to process, Mr. Orion said, so it's time to meet your roommates and head over to your rooms. They are all returning students and can help answer your questions. I guess we won't be rooming together, Thea said. Ava was flattered that Thea sounded disappointed, especially since Ava felt the same way. Thea's focus on the upside of being a monster seemed a little weird, but it also showed she was accepting, like a good friend. Ava could certainly use one, now more than ever. Mr. Orion waved his hand and the doors of the great hall swung open. All right, chapter 7. A group of kids filed into the great hall and began to circulate through the room. Ava tried to console herself that there wasn't a fang or claw among them. Ava Baldwin? Ava turned around to see a moon-faced girl with striking turquoise eyes and a fringe of dark bangs behind her. The girl thrust out a pale hand. I'm Layla, your new roommate. Your head is probably spinning, right? I remember this night so well from last year. I was like, what is going on? Don't worry, I'll explain everything. Come on, I'll take you to our room. I already moved your bags there. Again, Ava glanced over at Jax, hoping to grab him, but Layla put her arm around Ava and gently steered her out of the great hall and back down the corridor, chatting constantly. Yeah, I would have definitely wanted to talk to my sibling before I took off, right? Ava registered a few scraps of information. Layla was a Venice native. There aren't many of us, but her parents were from Egypt. She liked fashion and boy bands, especially K-pop, and also the Twilight series of vampire books. Ava tried to remember whether there was a monster known for talking nonstop, but she started paying closer attention when Layla began to discuss the layout of the school. The palazzo has 4 floors. Everyone's assigned to a floor based on the results of their ancestry test. Kids with the lowest percentage of monster live on the top floor. Kids with the highest live on the bottom. But there was no monster category, Ava said. Sure there was. They just call it undetermined. You'll remember how much she was? She was 15% undetermined, right? Ava recalled Mr. Heff's explanation, how undetermined meant you didn't match any existing genetic populations. He must have meant of mortals. They bypassed a grand staircase that presumably led up to the higher, less monstery floors and turned down another corridor of rooms that faced out on the Grand Canal. I had a big percentage? Ava blurted out. That's why you're on the first floor, Layla said cheerfully. We're the most monstery floor. Ava's expression must have given away her disappointment because Layla stopped and turned to her. If you do well, Mr. Orion may let you move upstairs. There are a few really monstery kids he lets live on the fourth floor. But Ava was no longer paying attention to Layla's words. She was staring at her eyes. Ava was certain they had been turquoise. Yeah, she said that. Remember turquoise eyes? But now they were a deep chocolate brown. Layla had also definitely had bangs. But now her hair was parted in the middle and the fringe was gone. You look different, Ava stammered. Don't get alarmed. Layla pulled a small mirror out of her back pocket. It's still me. I'm just a descendant of an Impusa, I think is how you pronounce it. Empusa, Impusa, a shape-shifting vampire. Oh, vampire. That goes to tell you why she likes the Twilight stories. Then she looked at herself. Ugh, I look 1,000 times better without those bangs. Don't get alarmed. What Ava knew about Impuse wasn't the least bit comforting. They were monstrous spirits loyal to the moon goddess Hecate, who drank the blood and ate the flesh of their human victims. She wondered if, in the midst of all of her chatter, Layla had been sizing up her as a snack. So how do you figure out you were a vampire? Ava asked, trying to sound casual. Layla sighed. I had a feeling you might focus on the vampire part, but shape-shifting is my power. I inherited. I didn't get the blood-drinking gene. How about the flesh-eating one? Ava asked. I'm vegan. I don't even drink milk. Layla ran her fingers through her long hair. I should have told you right away, but I was hoping that maybe I wouldn't change tonight. You can't control it? Ava asked. Layla shook her head. Not yet, but I'm working on it. Do most kids know what kind of monster they are? Ava asked. Most new ones don't. At least not at the beginning of the year, Layla said, but the teachers already know. Oh, that's interesting, right? From the DNA test? No, the genetic results aren't that specific. But the Olympians are obsessed with genealogy, so they keep these really detailed family trees. But if they know who we're related to, why don't they just tell us? Ava asked. They like to see what kind of powers you develop first. In some kids, their monster powers are so watered down that they're not dangerous. For example, there's a couple kids related to the Sphinx, but all they can do is tell good riddles. And there's a bunch of siren girls on the third floor. They have an a cappella group that drives everyone crazy, but not literally. But other kids, Ava said, thinking about Owen's vacant stare. They can get into a lot more trouble, Layla said. She pointed to the door at the end of the corridor. Here's our room. Ava followed her inside. The room wasn't large, but was ample enough for 2 beds, dressers, and desks. Ava's bag sat waiting to be unpacked, but instead she walked over to the windows. There were 2 of them, and they faced out onto the Grand Canal. It was too dark to see the water, but Ava could hear it slapping gently against the side of the palazzo. I know it's hard to sleep, Layla said, but you should try. It's the best way to get over the shock. You'll feel better in the morning. Ava sighed. She wanted to find Jax, but her head was spinning with everything she had learned, and her eyelids felt heavy after the enormous meal and long day. Late, she's probably still a little jet lagged, too. They hadn't been there that long, had they? Layla was probably right. She should go to sleep and talk to Jax in the morning. She turned to thank her friend, only to find that Layla had shifted into another version of herself, this time with green eyes and wavy copper hair. It was as if she had a dozen roommates in one. How would she even recognize her in the halls to say hi? Ava changed into her pajamas and brushed her teeth, then grabbed Garter and collapsed into bed. This was when her mom would usually come to kiss her goodnight. She wished she would come now. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Ava imagined asking her, but the mom in her head stayed as silent as the one who'd left her at the academia without even a goodbye. Remember, she hugged her, but she didn't say anything. The mom didn't. She was crying. Yeah. So, but she knew Ava was getting ready to find out, and Jax too. She had hidden it from them their whole life, and probably the dad doesn't know, I would guess, right? So she hadn't told anyone, and now they were going to find out that their mom was a monster and which kind of monster she was. So I can see where the mom would have been quite upset, right? All right. So that was chapter 6 and 7. Let me see here. Let me see how long 8 is. Okay, let's go ahead and read 8 in this too. Okay. So The next morning, when Ava opened her eyes, she found herself staring at a faint yellow line that cut across the bedroom wall. She sat up and traced it with her finger. Morning, said a voice behind her. She turned to find Layla stretching in bed. Her hair had turned blonde and straightened itself in the night. Her eyes were a cornflower blue. What's this? Ava asked. It's a watermark, Layla said. Venice is Poseidon City. He sometimes floods it. Ava glanced at the windows, imagined the canal overflowing into her room. Maybe this was why the gods put the kids who had the most monster heritage on the first floor, so Poseidon could drown them. I would worry about that too, right? Layla must have seen the worry on her face because she smiled reassuringly. Don't worry. Mr. Orion said to evacuate us first. She hopped out of bed and opened the shutters so sunlight streamed in, dispelling Ava's dark thoughts. Come on, first day of classes. Let's get breakfast. Mr. Orion will hand out schedules there too. A half hour later, Ava sat in the great hall, drinking a cup of hot chocolate and sharing a plate of croissants, or cornetto, as the Italians called them, with Layla. And I am sure I am butchering all these Italian words because I don't speak Italian, but I'm trying. They had been the first students to arrive, but now a few more were trickling in. Ava could identify the other new students from the dark circles beneath their eyes, which means they didn't sleep much, right? She doubted any of them had slept well. She kept an eye out for Jax, but there was no sign of him. The loud bang of a tray crashing down on the table, followed by a sweaty smell, interrupted her thoughts. A scrawny boy with shaggy brown hair plopped down beside them. He propped up one bony knee and leaned his elbows on the table, almost as if he were perching in his chair. His clothes hung off him, although Ava noticed that his tray was piled with food: croissants, bread, salami, fruit, even scrambled eggs that Ava had not seen offered. Hi, Arnold, Layla said, feeling a little hungry this morning. Starving, he said, in between stuffing his mouth with scrambled egg. I sometimes think it's my power, but I guess most 13-year-old boys are ravenous. Is this your new roommate? Ava, Layla said. Ava gave an awkward wave. I'm Arnold, Arnold said with an eggy smile. But Layla said, Hi, Arnold, so I guess you already knew that. His face turned red and he dropped his fork. If there was such a thing as the popular crowd among monsters, Ava clearly hadn't ended up there. But that was fine with her. Popular kids like Owen could be mean enough even without dangerous powers. While he was under the table searching for his fork, Layla said, Arnold doesn't have his power yet. Arnold popped up from beneath the table and rubbed his fork with his shirt. I'm the only returning second former who doesn't. You're just a late developer, Layla said. It's no big deal. Ava doesn't have her power yet either. Ava had never told Layla this. She just assumed it. But Ava nodded as if the whole Owen incident had never happened. Arnold seemed nice, if a bit goofy, and in need of a shower, and she didn't want to make him feel worse. Plus, in the more reasonable light of day, she wasn't certain that whatever she did to Owen was her power. What monster made kids stare vacantly and drool? Actually, there was someone with a similar power, but the thought of her made Ava's skin crawl. Ugh, talk about being the ugliest, most reviled monster of them all. Ava pushed the disturbing thought away just as Fia rushed up to their table. Am I glad to see you, she said, and plopped down in the empty seat next to Ava. Same, Ava said and meant it, but she noticed that Fia looked more upset now than when they had learned they were part monster. Her short hair was sticking up, straight up, and her hazel eyes darted suspiciously around the great hall. What's wrong? I have the creepiest roommate, Fia said. She told me that I would lose my tongue. You're not Cassie's new roommate, are you? Layla asked. Fia looked up, seeming to notice Layla and Arnold for the first time. How did you know? She's always creeping people out with her prophecies. She can't help it, Arnold said. She's descended from Python. You mean the snake that used to occupy the Oracle of Delphi? Ava asked. Layla nodded. Miss Cleo is going to love you because she already knows all the stuff about mythology, right? So her prophecies come true? Fia asked, running her tongue nervously over her lips. Not at all, Layla said. She's been wrong about everything from who'd win the World Cup to Miss Cleo's final exam essay question last year. The kids who listened to her all failed. She can't even predict what's for lunch most days, Arnold added, his mouth full of cornetto. Great. I have a defective oracle for a roommate, Fia said, but she looked relieved about the defective part. What floor are you guys? Same as you, Layla said. We're on the same floor? Ava and Fia said in unison. For the first time since Ava had seen her that morning, Fia smiled. Would Fia like her as much if she knew what Ava had done to Owen? Ava wasn't sure, but it made her happy that Fia wanted to be her friend, even if they weren't roommates. At least Fia wasn't far away. Ava introduced Layla and Arnold, who each in turn explained their power, or lack of it. The great hall had filled up by this time, and Ava noticed Mr. Orion, dressed in a suit, take his place on the podium. Good morning, he bellowed. I know everyone is eager to find out their teachers and classes, so let's get right to it. He smacked the podium with the heel of his hand, and across the great hall, stacks of books and binders appeared in front of every student. A single piece of paper marked schedule fluttered at the top. Ava grabbed it and scanned her courses: life sciences, pre algebra, intro to classical languages, design lab, physical education, Greek and Roman myths, humanities double period. And starting September 22nd, a twice weekly health education class. Looks like we're in most of the same classes, Via said, studying Ava's schedule over her shoulder. More good news. Ava wouldn't be alone. Mr. Orion clapped his hands till the din died down. Today you'll have a chance to meet your teachers and get a taste of each class. There will be no homework until tomorrow when classes begin in earnest. This was greeted by cheers and applause. Mostly, it seemed to Ava, from returning students. The new ones were looking around uncertainly and blinking their eyes, as if they still expected to wake up from what felt like a disturbing dream. I want to remind you again of our three strikes policy. If you use your powers to attempt to harm a teacher, you will be given a strike. If you disrespect the gods, you will be given a strike. If you leave campus, you will be given a strike. 3 strikes and you will be expelled, losing your only chance to learn to control the monstrous part of yourself and fit into normal mortal society. Ava remembered the way everyone had stared at her when she'd freaked out on Owen in the library. She couldn't stand the thought of being a social outcast for life. Inevitably, students who are expelled write me later, Mr. Orion continued. I want to share one such letter. He unfolded a piece of paper from his pocket and began to read. Dear Headmaster Orion, I am writing you from an asylum for the criminally insane. I could not control my powers and killed a man. When I tried to explain that this happened because I am part monster, I was committed here for life. If I have one regret, it's that I didn't take my academia education seriously. If I did, I wouldn't be here. Paid for by the Olympians, Via whispered. Ava coughed so she wouldn't laugh. Via was funny, but getting expelled from the academia was no joke. Ava promised herself she would follow the rules and never get a single strike. Before I release you, Mr. Orion continued, I want to invite one of our model students up to the podium to share an inspirational speech. Zale and Dino. Zale? Arnold groaned. Not a fan? Fia asked. He used to live on our floor, Layla said. He wasn't always nice, especially to Arnold. An enormous boy with a big chin and small eyes unfolded himself from a table near the front of the hall and lumbered up to the podium. With his hulking body out of the way, Ava spotted Jax at the same table. He was slumped and pale. She tried to catch his gaze, but Jax was focused on the podium, where Mr. Orion was pumping Zale's hand. Then Mr. Orion descended, and Zale took out a crumpled piece of paper. He flattened it out with one beefy hand, then closed one eye and peered at it with the other. Hello, fellow students of the Accademia del Forte. My name is Zale Andino, and I'm one of the most monstery kids at this school. That's right, my ancestry test showed 14.5% monster heritage. How much was Ava's? 15? It was only 14.5. There was a murmur from the other students, but all Ava could think was how she was a 0.5% more monster. Specifically, Zale droned on in his deep monotone, I am descended from a cyclops, who, as you know, are one-eyed, which is why I have better sight in one eye than the other. It's also why I'm big. Cyclopses are known for their giant size and impressive strength, but not their speaking skills, Thea whispered. Layla put her finger to her lips, but her eyes turned green and twinkled in amusement. When I started at the academia, I was on the bottom floor with others like me, Zale continued, and to be honest, I did not expect much of myself. But Mr. Orion and Miss Cleo and all my teachers believed in me. And I realized that the school motto, Ancestry is not destiny, was telling me I did not have to be an enemy of the gods. I could choose to help the gods. Over the course of my first 2 years at the academia, my teachers helped me learn to control the bad parts of myself, and Mr. Orion rewarded me by moving me up floor by floor. Now I live with kids whose monster impulses are much less than my own. I am a top athlete and student leader. I am here to tell you that you can be more than your ancestry. Hold up, Fia said. The Cyclops were never enemies of the Olympians. They always took their side. Fia had a point. It wasn't like Zale had really overcome his ancestry when his monster ancestors were fighting for the Olympians way back in the Titanomachy. But Ava still wanted to believe Zale's message that even a kid with a maximum of monster DNA could succeed at the academia. The first step was doing well in her classes and continuing to impress teachers like Miss Cleo, as dutiful applause greeted the end of Zale's speech. Ava scanned her schedule again. You know, except for classical languages and the Greek and Roman myths class, the classes don't seem that different from my old school. It's the students that make it different, Layla said. What do you mean? He asked. Well, you'll see, Arnold said. And we're going to stop right there. And next time I will read chapters 9 and 10, which will finish up your assignment, okay, for this week. All right. Later, Gators.